The champagne glass slipped from Marcus Chen's fingers, shattering against the marble floor of his penthouse office as the elderly cleaning woman's whispered Korean words echoed in his mind. 당신의 어머니는 아직 살아계십니다. Your mother is still alive. The woman, who had been quietly dusting his bookshelf moments before, now stood frozen by the window, her weathered hands clutching a cloth as she stared at him with eyes that held decades of secrets. Marcus felt his world tilt on its axis, 23 years of carefully constructed beliefs crumbling in an instant. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, broken only by the distant hum of Seoul's traffic 30 floors below. Marcus had built his empire on certainty, on facts and figures that never lied. But now he found himself staring at a woman whose very presence seemed to challenge everything he thought he knew about his past. Mrs. Park, as she was listed on the cleaning company's roster, had been servicing his building for over a year, yet he had never truly seen her until this moment. Now, as she stood bathed in the golden afternoon light streaming through his floor-to-ceiling windows, he noticed the way her shoulders curved with the weight of untold stories, the careful way she moved as if every step carried the memory of a long journey. 3 weeks earlier, Marcus had been riding the elevator to his office on the 42nd floor of the Pinnacle Tower when he first encountered Mrs. Park in a way that pierced through his usual indifference to the building's service staff. The elevator had malfunctioned between floors, trapping them together for nearly 2 hours. While most people might have panicked or complained about the inconvenience, the elderly Korean woman had simply settled into a corner and begun humming a melody that stirred something deep and forgotten in Marcus's chest. The tune was hauntingly familiar, like a half-remembered dream from childhood, but when he asked her about it, she had merely smiled and said it was an old lullaby her daughter used to love. That conversation had planted a seed of curiosity in Marcus's mind, though he had dismissed it as coincidence. His adoptive parents, the Chens, had told him his birth mother was dead, killed in a car accident when he was just 6 months old. They had been vague about the details, explaining only that she had been a young Korean immigrant who worked multiple jobs to support herself and her infant son. The story had always felt incomplete to Marcus, full of gaps that his adoptive parents seemed reluctant to fill, but he had learned not to ask too many questions. The Chens had given him everything money could buy, the best education, opportunities beyond measure, and a path to the kind of success that most people could only dream of. He owed them his gratitude, not his doubts. Yet as the days passed following the elevator incident, Marcus found himself paying closer attention to Mrs. Park during her weekly visits to his office. She worked with a methodical precision that spoke of decades of practice, never disturbing his papers or personal items, moving through his space like a ghost who understood the sacred nature of a powerful man's domain. But occasionally, he would catch her pausing at certain objects. A framed photograph from his college graduation, a ceramic vase that his adoptive mother had given him for his 30th birthday, a small jade figurine that had been among his few childhood possessions. During these moments, her expression would shift from professional neutrality to something that looked almost like recognition, as if she were seeing not just the objects themselves, but the story they told about the man who owned them. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday evening, when Marcus had stayed late to review quarterly reports from his pharmaceutical company's Korean division. The building was nearly empty except for security and the night cleaning crew, and the usual bustle of daytime business had been replaced by an almost cathedral-like quiet. Mrs. Park entered his office at precisely 7:30, as she always did on Thursdays, but something was different about her demeanor. She seemed more hesitant than usual, stealing glances at him as she worked, as if wrestling with some internal decision. Marcus was absorbed in a complex analysis of manufacturing costs when he heard her speak, her voice so soft he almost missed it entirely. She was standing near his desk, ostensibly emptying his wastebasket, when she murmured something in Korean that made his blood run cold. The words themselves were foreign to him. He had never learned his birth mother's language despite his heritage, but the tone carried a weight of emotion that transcended linguistic barriers. When he looked up sharply, meeting her eyes, she immediately looked away and continued with her work as if nothing had happened. The moment might have passed without consequence, if not for what happened next. As Mrs. Park moved toward the window to clean the glass, she began humming that same lullaby from the elevator, But this time, Marcus caught fragments of Korean lyrics woven between the melody. The combination of the whispered words and the familiar tune created a resonance in his chest that felt almost physical, as if some long-dormant part of his DNA was awakening to a frequency it had been programmed to recognize. He found himself standing without conscious decision, crossing the room toward her with steps that felt guided by instinct rather than intention. Mrs. Park must have sensed his approach, because she stopped humming abruptly and turned to face him, the cleaning cloth falling from her hands to the floor. For a moment, they stood facing each other in the gathering twilight, two strangers connected by threads of possibility that neither fully understood. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, he found himself studying her face with an intensity that felt almost invasive, searching for something he couldn't name in the lines around her eyes, the shape of her mouth, the way she held her head when she was nervous. "Mrs. Park," he finally managed, his voice rougher than he intended. "That song you were humming, where did you learn it?" The question hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross. Mrs. Park's hands fluttered to her chest, a gesture that seemed unconscious but spoke of deep emotion barely held in check. When she answered, her English was careful and precise, each word chosen with the deliberation of someone for whom the language required constant translation. "It is very old song," she said, her accent thick but her meaning clear. "My grandmother sing to my mother sing to me. I sing to my—" She paused, her eyes filling with tears that she quickly blinked away. "I sing to my daughter long ago." The word daughter hit Marcus like a physical blow, though he couldn't explain why. He had no reason to think this woman's family history had any connection to his own, yet something in her tone, in the careful way she had hesitated before speaking, suggested layers of meaning beneath the simple statement. He found himself taking another step closer, drawn by an inexplicable magnetism that seemed to emanate from her small, dignified form. "You have a daughter?" he asked, though even as the words left his mouth, he realized how presumptuous they sounded. Mrs. Park was his employee in the most peripheral sense, someone whose personal life was none of his business, yet he felt compelled to know more about this woman who had somehow managed to stir memories he wasn't sure he actually possessed. Mrs. Park's composure cracked slightly at his question, and for a moment Marcus glimpsed the raw pain that lived beneath her professional exterior. She pressed her lips together as if physically preventing words from escaping, but her eyes told a story of loss so profound that it made his chest ache in sympathy. "I had daughter," she finally whispered, the past tense carrying the weight of 1,000 untold stories. "Very beautiful, very smart. She have son, little baby boy with eyes like—" She stopped abruptly, her gaze darting to Marcus's face before quickly looking away. "But that was long time ago. Different life." The phrase, different life, seemed to echo in the space between them, loaded with implications that Marcus didn't dare examine too closely. He found himself thinking about his own past, about the gaps in his childhood memory that his adoptive parents had always attributed to trauma from losing his birth mother so young. He had accepted their explanation because it was easier than questioning, because the life they had built for him was good, and questioning felt like ingratitude. But now, standing in the growing darkness of his office with this woman whose pain seemed to mirror something deep in his own soul, he began to wonder if there were truths he had been too afraid or too comfortable to seek. "Mrs. Park," he said slowly, testing each word before speaking it, "your daughter. What happened to her?" The question was invasive, inappropriate, and potentially cruel, but Marcus found he couldn't retract it. Something about this woman's presence had awakened a hunger for truth that he hadn't realized he possessed, a need to understand not just her story, but how it might connect to his own. Mrs. Park seemed to understand the deeper current of his question, because instead of answering directly, she moved to his desk and picked up the framed photograph from his college graduation. "You look like someone I used to know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Same eyes, same way of standing. Your parents, they must be very proud." The way she said parents, with that slight emphasis, made Marcus's heart skip a beat. It was as if she were testing the word, examining its fit in the context of his life. He found himself studying her face again, looking for similarities he might have missed, connections that logic told him couldn't exist, but that some deeper part of him seemed desperate to find. "My adoptive parents, yes," he said carefully, watching her reaction. "They've given me everything I could have asked for." Mrs. Park nodded slowly, but something in her expression shifted when he said, "adoptive." The word seemed to unlock something in her, a gate that had been carefully guarded but was now standing ajar. She set the photograph down with trembling hands and turned to face him fully, her small frame somehow seeming to grow taller as she made what appeared to be a momentous decision. "Mr. Marcus," she said, and hearing his name in her accented English felt strangely intimate, as if she were claiming some right to address him personally. "You know about your birth family? About the woman who gave you life?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Not because it was unexpected, but because it voiced the very thoughts that had been circling in his mind since their first conversation in the elevator. Marcus felt his carefully constructed professional persona beginning to crack, revealing the vulnerable child beneath who had always wondered about the woman who had brought him into the world, only to disappear from it so quickly. "I know she died when I was very young," he said, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. "In an accident. My parents said she was alone, that there was no other family." Mrs. Park's reaction to his words was immediate and dramatic. She pressed both hands to her mouth as if to prevent a cry from escaping, and her eyes filled with tears that finally spilled over onto her cheeks. For a long moment she stood there silently weeping while Marcus watched in confusion and growing alarm. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion and barely audible. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "No accident," she whispered, the words seeming to tear from her throat. "No death? She give you away, because she have no choice. Because she think you have better life with rich family than with poor girl who clean offices and speak no English." The world seemed to stop spinning as Marcus processed her words. The careful narrative his adoptive parents had constructed about his origins began to unravel in his mind, revealing gaps and inconsistencies he had been too trusting or too comfortable to examine. Mrs. Park's tears were flowing freely now, and she seemed to be fighting some internal battle between the desire to speak and the weight of years of imposed silence. "She never stopped loving you," Mrs. Park continued, her English becoming more broken as emotion overwhelmed her careful articulation. "She never stopped hoping someday maybe she see you again. Maybe she know if you are happy, if you are safe, if you become the man she dreamed you could be." Marcus felt his legs grow weak as the implications of her words began to sink in. The professional distance he maintained from the world, the careful emotional barriers he had constructed to protect himself from vulnerability, all of it was crumbling in the face of a possibility so overwhelming he could barely comprehend it. He reached for his desk chair, needing its solid presence to anchor him as his mind reeled with questions he was afraid to ask and answers he wasn't sure he was ready to hear. "Mrs. Park," he said, his voice cracking on her name, "are you telling me that my mother is still alive?" The question hung in the air between them like a living thing, pulsing with the weight of 23 years of separation, of missed birthdays and holidays, of bedtime stories never told and lullabies never sung. Mrs. Park looked at him with eyes that held a lifetime of love and regret, and when she spoke, her words came out in a rush, as if a dam had finally burst. "Your mother cleaned offices for 23 years, saving every penny she can spare, learning English one word at a time, following your life from far away like ghost who cannot rest," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "She know when you graduate high school, when you start university, when you build your company. She keep newspaper clippings of your success hidden in little box under her bed, and she cry every time she see your picture, because you grow so handsome, so successful, so much more than she ever dared dream." Marcus felt his knees give way completely as the full weight of revelation crashed over him. The woman standing before him, the elderly cleaning lady he had barely noticed for over a year, was not just someone who knew his story. She was his story. The lullaby that had stirred something deep in his memory, the way she had looked at his photographs with such intensity, the careful way she moved through his space as if it were sacred ground. It all made terrible, beautiful sense now. "You," he whispered, the word coming out as barely more than a breath. "You're—" Mrs. Park nodded. tears streaming down her face as she finally allowed herself to look at him fully, to drink in the sight of the son she had given away to give him a better life. When she spoke, it was in Korean again, but this time Marcus understood without translation because the words were written in her expression, in the love that radiated from every line of her face. "I am your mother," she said in English, her accent thick with emotion. "And I never, not for one single day, stop loving you." The champagne glass slipped from Marcus's fingers as the full circle of the moment completed itself, shattering against the marble floor like the carefully constructed walls around his heart. 23 years of questions finally had their answer, and it was standing right in front of him, wearing a cleaning uniform and carrying a lifetime of love that had never had anywhere to go. Mrs. Park, his mother, moved toward him slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. Her hands reached out tentatively, and Marcus found himself meeting her halfway, his own hands trembling as they connected with hers. The touch was electric, a completion of a circuit that had been broken for more than 2 decades, and in that moment, the successful businessman he had become melted away, leaving only the child who had always wondered why he felt so alone even when surrounded by everything money could buy. "Why now?" he managed to ask, his voice breaking on the words. "Why tell me now after all this time?" His mother's face crumpled with fresh tears as she squeezed his hands tighter, as if afraid he might disappear if she let go. When she answered, her voice was full of the weight of years of watching from the shadows, of loving from a distance, of hoping for a moment exactly like this one. "Because I am getting old," she said simply. "Because I clean your office every week and watch you work so hard, so alone, and I see in your eyes the same sadness I carry in my heart. Because maybe it is time to stop being afraid that love is not enough, that maybe love is the only thing that is enough." The words hung between them like a bridge spanning 23 years of separation, and Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a door that had been locked since childhood finally creaking open to let in the light. His mother was here, real and alive, and looking at him with a love so pure it took his breath away. The questions could wait. The explanations could come later. For now, there was only this moment, this recognition, this homecoming that neither of them had dared to believe was possible. As the last light of day faded from the windows of his penthouse office, Marcus Chen finally understood that all his success, all his achievements, all the empire he had built, meant nothing compared to the simple truth that had just been whispered to him in Korean by the woman who had loved him first and longest. His mother was alive, she was here, and after 23 years of separation, they had finally found their way back to each other. The story of how they had been torn apart was yet to be told, but the story of how they would build a future together was just beginning. And as his mother began to hum that familiar lullaby, Marcus closed his eyes and let himself be 6 months old again, safe in the knowledge that he was loved completely and unconditionally by the woman who had given him life twice, once at his birth, and once again on this golden afternoon when she had found the courage to reclaim him. The silence that followed stretched between them like a bridge neither was entirely sure how to cross. Marcus stared at the woman who had just revealed herself to be his mother, his mind struggling to reconcile the reality of her presence with the story he had been told his entire life. Mrs. Park stood before him, no longer just the quiet cleaning woman who had moved through his office like a shadow, but the flesh and blood connection to a past he had believed was buried forever. The weight of 23 years of separation pressed down on the room as Marcus slowly lowered himself into his desk chair, his legs no longer able to support him. His mother remained standing, her weathered hands clasped tightly in front of her as if she were physically holding herself together. The late afternoon light streaming through the windows cast long shadows across the marble floor, and somewhere in the distance, the sounds of Seoul's evening rush hour provided a constant backdrop to their earth-shattering reunion. "I need to understand," Marcus finally said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "They told me you were dead. My parents, the Chens, they said there was an accident. They showed me documents, death certificates. How is any of this possible?" His mother's face crumpled at his words, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks as she absorbed the depth of the deception that had kept them apart. She moved slowly to the chair across from his desk, settling into it with the careful movements of someone who had carried a heavy burden for far too long. "Death certificate not real," she said, her English becoming more fragmented as the emotion overwhelmed her careful pronunciation. Rich family, they have money to make papers say anything they want. They tell you I am dead, because easier than truth. Easier than saying they buy baby from desperate girl who have no choice. The words hit Marcus like physical blows, each revelation dismantling another piece of the foundation his life had been built upon. He thought of his adoptive parents, Douglas and Helen Chen, who had raised him with apparent love and given him every advantage money could provide. The idea that their kindness had been built on such a fundamental lie felt like a betrayal that reached into his very bones. "Buy?" he whispered, the word tasting bitter in his mouth. "You're saying they bought me?" His mother nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on her hands, as if the shame of the admission was too great to bear while looking at him directly. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible, each word weighted with decades of regret and self-recrimination. "I was 18 years old, come to Korea from small village with nothing but clothes on my back and baby growing inside me," she began, her accent thickening as she retreated into memories that clearly still caused her pain. "Your father, he was American soldier, very handsome, very charming. He promised to take me to America, promised to marry me, but when I tell him about baby, he disappear like smoke and wind." Marcus felt his chest tighten as he imagined his mother as a young woman, alone and pregnant in a foreign city with no resources and no support system. The picture she painted was so different from the comfortable narrative he had grown up with that it felt like learning about a completely different person's life. "I work 3 jobs while I am pregnant," she continued, her voice growing stronger as she forced herself to continue the story. "Clean offices at night, work in factory during day, wash dishes in restaurant on weekends. I save everyone I can, but still not enough for baby formula, for doctor visits, for place to live that is safe." She paused, reaching into her uniform pocket to pull out a worn leather wallet. From it, she extracted a small, faded photograph that she held out to Marcus with trembling hands. He took it carefully, as if it might crumble at his touch, and found himself looking at a picture of a young Korean woman holding a baby. The woman looked impossibly young, barely more than a child herself, but her eyes held a fierce love as she gazed down at the infant in her arms. "That is you, 3 months old," she said softly. "Only picture I have of us together." Marcus stared at the photograph, seeing his own features reflected in the baby's face, seeing the exhaustion and love in his mother's youthful expression. The woman in the picture looked nothing like the successful, composed businessman he had become, yet he could see the genetic thread that connected them across the years. "The Chen family, they come to agency where I work as cleaning girl," she continued, her voice taking on a mechanical quality as if she had rehearsed this story countless times in her mind. "They cannot have children, they want baby very much. Agency lady, she tell them about me, about you. She say they can give you life I never can, education, opportunities, everything." Marcus looked up from the photograph to find his mother watching him with an expression of such profound sadness that it made his heart ache. He could see in her face the 18-year-old girl who had been faced with an impossible choice, and he began to understand the magnitude of the sacrifice she had made. "They offer money," she whispered. "More money than I see in whole life. Enough to pay for my parents' medical bills back in village. Enough to maybe start small business. Enough to have future, instead of just surviving day by day. Agency lady, she say if I really love you, I let you go to family who can take care of you properly." The photograph trembled in Marcus's hands as he absorbed the implications of what she was telling him. His adoptive parents hadn't rescued him from a tragic situation. They had taken advantage of a desperate young woman's circumstances to get what they wanted. The generosity he had always attributed to them now felt tainted by the knowledge of how they had obtained their son. "But the death certificate," he said, his mind still struggling to piece together the logistics of the deception. "Why go to such lengths to make me believe you were dead? Why not just tell me the truth about the adoption?" His mother's face hardened slightly, and for the first time since her revelation, Marcus glimpsed the steel beneath her gentle exterior, the strength that had allowed her to survive and eventually find her way back to him. "Because dead mother cannot change her mind," she said, her voice carrying an edge of bitterness that spoke to years of suppressed anger. "Dead mother cannot come looking for son when she finally have money saved and English learned. Dead mother cannot disrupt perfect family they build with boy they steal from desperate girl." The word steal hung in the air between them like an accusation, and Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions wash over him. Part of him wanted to defend the people who had raised him, who had loved him in their way, and given him opportunities he might never have had otherwise. But another part of him, a part that had always felt like something was missing from his life, recognized the truth in his mother's words and felt a deep anger at the deception that had robbed them both of 23 years together. "Did you ever try to find me?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer from the way she had moved through his office with such familiarity, from the careful way she had observed his belongings and photographs. His mother's face softened at his question, and she reached into her wallet again, this time pulling out a small stack of newspaper clippings that had been carefully preserved despite their obvious age. She spread them on his desk like a timeline of his life, each one marking a milestone she had witnessed from afar. "I try many times," she said, her finger tracing the headline of his college graduation announcement. "But Chen family, they have lawyers, they have money, they have power. Every time I get close, doors close in my face. Social worker tell me I sign papers giving up all rights, that I cannot bother family again, where they call police." Marcus examined the clippings with growing amazement and heartbreak. Here was his high school valedictorian speech, his acceptance to Seoul National University, the announcement of his pharmaceutical company's founding, even a business magazine profile from just 2 years ago. His mother had been following his life like a devoted fan, celebrating his successes from the shadows while being unable to share in them directly. "But you found a way," he said, looking up at her with new respect. "You got close to me anyway." She nodded, a small smile breaking through her tears for the first time since her revelation. The smile transformed her face, revealing glimpses of the young woman she had once been and hints of the joy that had been buried beneath decades of loss. "5 years ago, I learned that cleaning company I work for get contract with Pinnacle Tower," she explained. "I asked supervisor many times to assign me to your floor. I tell her I have experience with executive offices, I am reliable, I will not cause problems. Finally, she agreed." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the implications of what she was telling him. His mother hadn't stumbled into his life by accident, hadn't been randomly assigned to clean his office. She had orchestrated their proximity with the patience and determination of someone who had spent decades planning for this moment. "You've been watching me for a year," he said, not accusingly but with a kind of awed recognition of her dedication. "Learning my routines, my habits, waiting for the right moment." "Watching and loving," she corrected gently. "Learning who you become, seeing if you are happy, if Chen family keep their promise to give you good life. I see you work very hard, very long hours. I see you eat dinner alone at desk many nights. I see pictures on your desk, but no family photos, no girlfriend, no children. And I wonder if maybe all the money and success in the world cannot fill the empty place that every adopted child carry in their heart." Her words struck him like arrows finding their mark, and Marcus realized that she had seen through his successful facade to the loneliness he had always carried but never fully acknowledged. The long hours, the focus on work above all else, the difficulty he had always had forming deep personal connections, all of it suddenly made sense in the context of the fundamental disconnection he had lived with his entire life. "The elevator," he said suddenly, remembering their first real interaction. "That wasn't an accident either, was it?" His mother looked slightly embarrassed, like a child caught in a harmless mischief. "Maintenance man owe me favor," she admitted. "I ask him to make elevators stop between floors during time you usually leave office. I think maybe if we stuck together for a little while, maybe you notice me as person instead of invisible cleaning lady." Marcus couldn't help but laugh, despite the emotional intensity of the moment. The image of his dignified mother, conspiring with maintenance workers to manufacture their meeting, was both touching and slightly absurd, a testament to the lengths a parent's love would drive them to. "And the humming," he said, understanding flooding through him. "That lullaby. You were testing me, weren't you? Seeing if I would recognize it somehow." She nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "It was song I sing to you when you were baby. When you have trouble sleeping. I sing it every night for 3 months until they take you away. I hope maybe somewhere deep in your heart you remember mother's voice. Mother's love." The revelation hit Marcus like a tsunami of emotion. And suddenly he was 6 months old again, hearing his mother's voice for the first time in 23 years. The melody that had stirred something inexplicable in his chest now made perfect sense. A genetic memory that had survived decades of separation and silence. "I did remember," he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. Not consciously, but something about it felt like home, like a piece of myself I didn't know was missing. They sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the magnitude of what had been revealed and what it meant for their future. Outside, the lights of Seoul were beginning to twinkle in the gathering darkness, and Marcus found himself seeing the city differently, not just as the backdrop for his business empire, but as the place where his mother had struggled and survived, and eventually found the courage to reclaim her son. "What about the Chens?" he finally asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. "Do they know you're alive? Do they know you found me?" His mother's expression grew troubled, and she shifted uncomfortably in her chair. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight of apprehension that made Marcus's stomach tighten with dread. "They know," she said quietly. 3 months ago, Helen Chen called cleaning company. She asked many questions about me, about why I request to work on your floor specifically. "Supervisor, she tell Mrs. Chen that I am very good worker, very reliable, but Mrs. Chen not satisfied. She hire private investigator." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice as the implications of what she was saying began to sink in. His adoptive parents, the people who had raised him and whom he had always trusted, had been actively monitoring his life and investigating anyone who came too close to him. The level of control and surveillance they had maintained was both shocking and deeply disturbing. 2 weeks ago, I get phone call from Douglas Chen, his mother continued, her voice growing stronger as if facing her fear directly gave her courage. "He tell me I am violating agreement I signed 23 years ago. He say if I do not quit job and disappear from your life immediately, he will have me deported, will make sure I never work in Seoul again." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, and he felt a rage building in his chest unlike anything he had ever experienced. The people he had called parents for 23 years had threatened the woman who had given birth to him, had tried to force her out of his life once again through intimidation and economic pressure. "That's why you told me today," he said, understanding flooding through him. "You are running out of time." She nodded, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. "Douglas Chen, give me 1 week to disappear. Tomorrow is last day. I know if I leave without telling you truth, I never get another chance. I know you might hate me for disrupting your life, for bringing this trouble to your door. But I cannot go to my grave knowing my son think his mother never loved him, never wanted him, never fought to find him." Marcus stood abruptly, his chair rolling backward as he paced to the window overlooking the glittering city below. His mind was racing, processing not just the emotional impact of learning his mother was alive, but the practical implications of what this meant for his relationship with the Chens, for his business, for the entire structure of his life. "They can't do this," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "They can't threaten you, can't force you to disappear again. I won't let them." His mother rose from her chair and moved to stand beside him at the window, her small frame dwarfed by his height, but her presence somehow filling the space around them with warmth and strength. "You are a successful man now," she said softly. "You have power, influence, money, things I never had when I was 18 and desperate. But Chen family, they still have connections. They still have ways to hurt people who get in their way. I do not want my love for you to destroy the life you build." Marcus turned to face her, and for the first time since her revelation, he felt the full weight of his emotions settling into determination, rather than shock. Looking at his mother, seeing the love and sacrifice written in every line of her face, he made a decision that felt like the first truly authentic choice of his adult life. "Mom," he said, the word feeling strange and wonderful on his tongue. "I've spent my entire life trying to live up to expectations that were built on a lie. Trying to be grateful for a gift that was actually theft. I won't let them take you away from me again." The word mom seemed to break something loose in both of them, and suddenly they were embracing, 23 years of separation collapsing in an instant as they held each other for the first time since he was an infant. Marcus felt his mother's tears soaking through his expensive shirt, felt her small hands clutching at his back as if she were afraid he might disappear, and realized that all his success, all his achievements, All the empire he had built meant nothing compared to this moment of connection with the woman who had loved him first and longest. "I have plan," he said as they finally pulled apart, his voice steady with newfound resolve. "But I need you to trust me, and I need you to be brave for just a little while longer." His mother looked up at him with eyes that held a lifetime of love and loss, but also a spark of hope that had somehow survived decades of separation and disappointment. When she nodded, Marcus saw in her face not just his mother, but the strongest person he had ever known. The reunion was far from over, and the battles ahead would test them both in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time in 23 years, Marcus Chen felt like he knew who he really was, and more importantly, where he had come from. The truth had finally set them both free, and now it was time to fight for the future they had been denied for far too long. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.